Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for April 22nd, 2025. The unipolar order that was imposed by the Neocons after the peaceful dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1992 has outlived its shelf life and needs to be flushed. The slogan for it was that we are experiencing the triumph of liberal democracy, and that represents the end of history. That is, the struggle between different systems is now over. The West has won, and the unipolar order, or the sole hegemon, is the rule of the day, the so-called rules-based order. Well, the epitaph of that era was provided with a bit of spicy irony by columnist Matt Taibbi yesterday. He wrote, quote, "A quarter of a century later, history not only isn't over, we have more of it every week than we know what to do with," unquote. And of course, this is something that all of you have experienced with the confusing swirl of events. And so I want to begin today with a quick overview of current history to place us in the real world as opposed to the world dominated by the so-called mainstream media. And I'm going to talk about two aspects. One is the fierce battle over U.S.-Russia normalization, and secondly, the so-called tariff war. So let's start with the U.S.-Russia normalization. And on this, President Trump is sticking to his guns. That is, his commitment to achieve a peaceful resolution to the Ukraine war, which can be lasting and would include an expanded U.S.-Russian relationship that takes up all questions that are outstanding in the world, including trade, including energy production, including the relationship of the NATO to Russia, and so on. Now, this is under attack from forces from the City of London. Now, Trump is working closely with Steve Witkoff, who's had several long meetings with Putin, which we don't know fully what they were discussing, but we do know that they're continuing the process. But what we're seeing is a use of Europe, that is the European Union, as a phony confederation that essentially represents the remnants of the European oligarchy, demanding rearmament and preparing for war with Russia. Now, rearmament is part of a policy of reflation, that is, pumping money into the system to bail out the collapsing banks and corporations. But the latest nonsense coming from Estonia is just unbelievable. Here we have the foreign minister Tsahkna from Estonia. Here's what he said. "We have a couple of years to prepare for Russia's full-scale invasion capabilities to be ready." So he's arguing the European line, rearmament is necessary because Russia is about to attack. Now, this is the classic mouse that roared scenario, referring to the Peter Sellers movie, in which a small country, which is bankrupt, goes to war against the United States in expectation it will be rebuilt after losing the war. Now, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the Baltic countries, are the most aligned with the British and the French on continuing the war. They have a total of 6 million people. This is almost nothing. And yet it's like the old saying, the 801 million people of Albania and China stand against the imperial forces. They are a rallying cry for war. But for what purpose? Well, the purpose is to bail out the financial system and to weaken Russia and prepare to carve up Russia to be taken over by Western corporate cartels. An example of this is another Estonian, Kallas, who's the foreign minister of the European Union, put out a statement saying no Western country should participate in the May 9th events in Moscow commemorating the victory over fascism. Well, that doesn't make sense, does it? And people such as Fico of Slovakia plan on attending. Now, meanwhile, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, is standing side by side with Starmer and Macron, saying that Europe must be prepared to fight, must not give up Ukraine. Now, this is coming largely from the City of London, as we keep reporting. But here's an example of a response to that. The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service put out a statement which is titled, "Eurofascism, just as 80 years ago, is the common enemy of Moscow and Washington." And it provides a brief historical review of certain occasions when Moscow and Washington were allied, including the Crimean War and the Suez Crisis. And what they say is that the history shows the US and the Russians fighting against the British and the French Empire. And unfortunately, in the US Congress, we have neocons in both parties who are lining up with Europe. And the Democrats are hoping that they can weaken Trump to win back the House and the Senate in the midterm elections in 2026. Now, the second issue is the so-called tariff fight, the economy. The real issue here is not going to be solved by tariffs. The real issue is fighting the ideology of globalization, which is based on financialization, global banking control over governments. That's the old saying for what is corporatism. That's the real issue, corporate fascism. And the center of this is, again, London and the Davos establishment. The idea is that globalization can allow the advanced countries to outsource, taking advantage of cheap labor from around the world, and then engage in speculation to create a bubble economy, which will be defended by war. And in order to fight the war, you need militarization, massive spending on rearmament. And along with this is you have deindustrialization, which will lead to global poverty. Now, the City of London is threatening to attack the US dollar by going after US bonds. So keep an eye on the bond markets. The idea is that you create a situation where the US has to pump out a growing volume of funny money to prop up the bond markets. Now, this is to carry out what? To do what? Improve the situation in the United States? No, not at all. It's part of the Davos agenda, the green transition, that is the attack on science and technology and industry, and an end to sovereignty, destroy the sovereign nation state, which fights for the interests of its people against the globalist cartels. Now, what we're dealing with here is an organized opposition. And President Trump, with the tariffs, is focused on one small aspect of it. What's missing in his fight is the identification of globalization as the enemy, and the solution being strengthen the institutions of sovereign nations, starting with control over banking and finance. You don't leave banking and finance in the hands of the oligarchs who are out to destroy your country. And unfortunately, some of these oligarchs are inside the Treasury Department and among the advisors to President Trump, as they were in the last term. So what's necessary instead is the LaRouche solution, based on physical economy. You need a credit system and a banking system which can channel volumes of credit into the physical production capabilities, including in new technologies, infrastructure, and so on. And in order to do that, you have to name the enemy. The enemy is not China. The enemy is not Iran. The enemy is not Russia. The enemy is your own globalist establishment that in the United States was the Biden administration, the Obama administration, the G.W. Bush administration, the Clinton administration. That's the enemy of the United States. And that's also the enemy of Russia, as the Russian Foreign Service intelligence report makes clear. So what's needed now is to go after the global financial establishment, as represented by Davos and the World Economic Forum, the IMF, the Bank for International Settlements, the World Trade Organization, and to point out what is their goal. It's to destroy the nation states so as to reduce global population. That's clear if you listen to what Klaus Schwab was saying as a spokesperson for King Charles, who himself was a spokesperson for his father, Prince Philip, one of the most outspoken proponents of reducing population. They will do this through permanent war and financialization. The solution, the LaRouche economic policy, physical economy. And I'm again going to be attaching as a link in the description section the LaRouche solution to the bubble which is about to pop. There'll be more material there for you, including my interview yesterday with Mel K, a link to that, where we discussed the same question. So the answers are clear. Don't get caught up in the hype or the confusion or the hybrid warfare. Join LaRouche, sign up for our conference. And I'm also going to have a link of who will be the speakers, the first panel of our conference on May 24th. Very interesting, impressive list. So sign up now so you can be part of that conference.